Okay, first thing it says is variables are given factors involved in a situation. They are referred to as variables because they can change or vary. Some variables change on their own, and some are caused to be changed by something else. Okay, we will be addressing that. That's very important right there. The input variable or the independent variable happens first. Okay, that is the one that can change on its own. If you think back to science, right, you guys worked on the independent variables that you would put into the science experiment, right? Those are the things that you could change. You would either put in more baking soda or less baking soda, like if we were building a volcano. The output value or dependent variable is what happens second. It changes because of the changes that are made to the independent variable. So for example, if I was building a volcano, right? My independent variable would be, maybe one of them would be how much baking soda I put into it, right? My dependent variable, well, what's the result? The more baking soda I put into it, the more, oh man, what else? Vinegar, right? Isn't it vinegar that you put into it? What happens to the volcano? It bubbles. And the more, oh, I remember when we had to make the volcano for my son's project, right? He wanted it all to blow up. Actually, he wanted to put the Mentos in it, but you put all of it in there, and then it some of y'all laughing because you put the Mentos in there trying to see how far it would blow up. Okay, but the more you put in there, the more the reaction happens, and the bigger the bubbles come out. Those bubbles and what's coming out is the output variable. Okay, that's what's happening afterwards. What you're going to find right here above on your papers that you have where it says independent variable, I want you to put in X. The independent variable is going to be the X. The dependent is going to be the Y. We use the word quantity when referring to words or phrases. So underline quantity and underline words and phrases. And I want you to go, and it says where it says variable, it's when we're going to use a letter. So circle that. What I mean is underneath here, let's write, if I was talking about, if one of my quantities that I'm talking about is miles, well, let me put it in red. If we were talking about how many miles we go, what letter can we put in there for miles? M. So the quantity would be miles. The variable would be M. The variable is just giving it one letter. The quantity means what does that letter mean? Okay, so you should have that down on your notes. As an example, if you were given two phrases, your shoe size and the size of your feet, you could write 3 different sentences to show this relationship. Actually, there's more than that, but I guess we're just going to talk about a few of them. Your shoe size depends on the size of your feet. Let me ask you a question. I just said a minute ago that we have X and Y. We had independent and dependent, right? The independent is going to be what happens first. Remember that independent variable was us putting the baking soda into the volcano? The dependent was the reaction. It was the thing that happened second. Look right here between these two quantities that I'm talking about. Your shoe size and the size of your feet. What happens first? Do you get to go and say, ooh, I want to be a size 15 shoe, and then poof, your foot grows? Your foot grows by itself. The foot grows first, right? Because I don't get to go in a shoe store, see these cute size 5 shoes, and my feet don't magically shrink to fit the shoes, right? So the thing that happens first is the size of your feet. So right now I want you to underline size of your feet, and I want you to write an I above it. That means that's your independent variable. Your shoe size right here is your dependent. So if you look at this, this is actually saying the dependent variable depends on the independent. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We're going to tie some more of these word phrases in there in just a second. Another way you could say that is your shoe size is a function of the size of your feet. So what I mean is that depends on means the exact same thing as a function of. They're going to use this, a function of, in math, in algebra a lot, right there. So sometimes it's easier when we're first beginning to switch in our brains and say, okay, if it says a function of, it means depends on. Because sometimes when we're going through and doing some of these sentences, it makes more sense to say it, okay, than to just read it. The next one says that your shoe size is determined. Oh, I didn't mean to cross that out. Where's my highlighter? All right. A function of is determined by. So these things all mean the same thing. These things I'm highlighting. Okay? So let me go through these three phrases. All mean the same thing. Now, look at this next one. This next one uses the phrase determines. What do you notice about the words in it? What did we say the size of your feet was? The independent or the dependent? Independent, right? The independent is the thing that happens first. So your feet grow, and then you have a shoe size. So when you use the word determines, that independent portion comes first. Don't worry, your brain might be all discombobulated, but we'll get it fixed. That's my new word this year, discombobulated. Okay, we just talked about which quantities you think is the independent variable or what happens first. Again, I want you to underline independent in your notes, and I want you to write X. Every time we see independent, we're going to underline it and put X right now. And we said that the quantity that was the independent was the size of your feet. And which quantities do you think are the dependent? Well, that would be your shoe size. Okay, so let's try it. If given an independent and dependent variable and quantity, whoa, hold up. Independent, I said we underline it. Independent is my X. Dependent is my Y. Remember, variable just means the letter. Quantity means the word, right? If we talked about miles and M. We want to be able to write a sentence which shows the relationship between two variables. There are 4 words or phrases that will be used to write these sentences. So here we go. We got depends on, function of, is determined by, and determines. Which 3 of those did we just say means the same? The first 3 do, yeah. So these right here all mean the same thing. And what I mean by that is we're going to have, it's going to go Y depends on X. So my independent, no, that's wrong. What am I supposed, this is supposed to be dependent. Dependent depends on the independent. Okay? We'll practice more with that in a minute. The one that is different is that determines right here. Remember, this is when you'll put the X first, then the Y. We're going to practice a lot with that. Didn't we just do this? Woo! What happened? Somebody doubled up the thing. Let's try again. All right, let's try this. Moving on up like the Jeffersons. Here we go. Some of y'all like the Jeffersons. Who are they? That's old school TV. All right. In each of the following sentences, underline the independent quantity. Independent is X. Circle the dependent. Remember, dependent is Y. All right. First phrase I see right here, it says, the grade I make in algebra depends on how hard I work in class. Okay, depends on, there's my phrase. So here are my two quantities. Remember, the independent is what has to happen first. What do you have to do first? You have to work, yeah. So we're going to underline how hard I work in class. The dependent is the grade. That's your end result. Okay? Look at this next one and try and answer this next one. Let's do this. Let me see where they go. There should be three of them. Yeah. Oh, okay, wait. Let's just do two at a time. These two right here. Take a minute, and I want you to try and answer these right here. Okay, so on this one, it says how well I can dance is determined by how much I practice. Okay, determined by right there. What's the independent variable? What has to happen first? Can you just magically dance and you are awesome? Don't even lie. Some of y'all are like, yeah, that's me. No. You have to practice first. Last I checked, okay? When my son tries to do the Dougie, it's just not pretty. We still are working on it, okay? And it is the dependent. All right, number 3. How fast, how much it rains determines, bless you, determines how fast the grass grows. Now remember, determines was that one that's a little different. Yeah, it flips it, doesn't it? Because what has to happen first? It has to rain first. Because if it doesn't rain, no grass grows. Okay? Right now, the red is the independent. The blue is the dependent. Okay? And on your tests and quizzes, they're going to tell you to underline the independent and circle the dependent. But it'll tell you that in the title. And that's why what I do, though, is I go and every time before a test or a quiz, what happened? Is right here. I always underline, like when it tells me to underline, and then I put the letter above it. Because I get confused, too. When I'm going through, and it's stressful when we're trying to do tests and quizzes, I'll underline, when it says underline the independent, I'll underline it. And then above independent, I always write X. And even what happens first, especially in the beginning on the quiz on Friday. Okay, the next two. The first thing I notice is that I have depends on. How many miles I can run depends on what kind of shape I'm in. Okay? I don't go out there, okay, I think, well, actually, I'm not delusional now, I'm old. But I don't think I can go out there right now and run 40 miles. Okay? I am not in shape. The first thing that happens is what kind of shape I'm in. That's your independent. As a result of what shape you're in, that helps determine how many miles you can run. Doesn't mean you like to run them. Oh, that's just me. I don't like to run. Other people love it. That's the dependent. This is the phrase, though, down here that messes people up. It says the weight on the elevator is a function of the number of people on the elevator. Guys, sometimes when you see function of, sometimes it's easier to write depends on above it. Especially if you remember that these two things mean the same thing. because the function of doesn't seem to make much sense to what we think in our own life. It says the weight on the elevator is a function of the number of people in the elevator. What has to happen first? People have to get in the elevator, okay? You know darn well too many people get in the elevator and then you get concerned because then they have the weight limit. Then we make jokes about my husband. We tell him he made the weight too much in the elevator. He has to get off. That is messed up. 6'8", whatever. He is tall. Next. All right. It says in each of the following, decide which is the independent and dependent quantity. Put an I over the independent and a D over the dependent. Then write a sentence showing the relationship using the phrase that it gives to you right here. So we have the first thing I want you to do, like for example, let's look at number 6 first. The first step is to go through and decide which is the independent, which is the dependent. So it talks about the number of games we win and how hard we practice. What do you have to do first? You have to practice. Okay? That's your independent. Your dependent is the number of games you would win. So now part B says write a sentence showing the independent-dependent relationships. How would I write this with the phrase depends on? The dependent depends on the independent. So yes, we're going to have the number of games we will win depends on how hard we practice. Okay? So I want you now to go through 7 and 8 and do the same thing. Identify the independent and then the dependent, and then write a sentence. Okay, on this one, the first thing you need to look at, you had to label the independent and the dependent. It talked about how much I study and my grades in school. The first thing that you have to do is study. The dependent is your grade in school. Is determined by, remember it's going to go, the dependent is determined by the independent. So my grades in school is determined by how much I study. The next one, where'd it go? Come on down. There we go. How much I eat and how hungry I am. The independent is going to be how hungry I am. Because if I'm not very hungry, I'm not going to eat very much. Remember, this I told you was the special one. It's going to be the independent determines the dependent. So, how hungry I am determines how much I will eat. Now, on this next part down here at the bottom, it says circle the dependent quantity. Remember, the dependent is the y. It's the thing that happens second. It says in a recent study, data was collected to chart the amount of bacteria growth over a certain amount of days. What are the two quantities? What are the two things they're talking about? They're talking about bacteria and what? And days. Okay, so on day one, I've got a petri dish with 10 whatever of bacteria. Okay? What has to happen now? The days have to happen. That time has to go on. So the number of days is the independent. It wants us to circle the dependent. It's the amount of bacteria growth. Oh, I'm going to throw something in there that's on the back side of this sheet. If I had a graph right here, okay, say this was the first quadrant, quadrant 1. What is the horizontal axis? Is that your X or your Y? It's your X. Label that on your paper, please, and your Y. You're going to have to be able to identify those as well. The independent variable, remember we said that was X. The dependent is the Y. If I was graphing this and labeling this on a graph, this would down here would be the number of days. The dependent of the Y would be the amount of bacteria. Okay? Because at the beginning of the days, we have a little bit of bacteria at day 1. What's going to happen to my bacteria as the day goes on? It's going to increase, right? Technically, probably, depending on what it is, it'll be what's called an exponential growth. It'll grow fast, but it will increase. It will go up. Okay, let's look at the next one. There is a direct relationship between the amount of smog in the air. Whoa, not what I wanted to do. Didn't want to cross it out. Smog in the air and the number of vehicles on the highway. Okay, so smog, that's like the stuff that comes out of the car, and that's the exhaust fumes, but as those go up and it pollutes the air. Smog is basically pollution in the air. So what has to happen first? Does smog just happen? The cars have to, no, the cars are going to help cause the smog. Okay, so that's your independent. Your dependent is going to be the amount of smog in the air. Take a second right here, if this was my axis for my X and my Y, and label them where you think they would go. We would have the number of vehicles be the X and the amount of smog in the Y. See, because when we have few vehicles on the road, the smog is low. The more vehicles we have on the road, the higher amount of smog there is. This line is going to be increasing. Okay? Okay, let's look at this next one. It says, on average, Kyla drives 25 miles in 1 hour. The function m equals 25h represents the number of m miles. Let's see if I can get my board going here. M miles and h hours. What is the independent quantity? Okay. Well, like I look up here and I think of it as y equals 25x. Well, 25 and the h match up right here. Independent quantity out of these two things right here, I know that hours has to happen first, the time. And so then the dependent would be the miles. Now then I have down here that blank depends on blank. Well, the dependent depends on the independent. So I have The number of miles depends on the number of hours. Oops, there's that S. Try the next one. Pause the video and come back and see how you do. After after teaching for several years, Mrs. Carter has realized there's a significant correlation between a student's attendance and their grade. Okay, well, what has to happen first? Well, let me try. I should highlight those really. Attendance and their grade. Well, the first thing that has to happen, the first thing they have to show up to class. So if it's the first thing, that's the independent. The grade is the thing that will be the result, and that's the dependent. So right here, the dependent is the grade. Now here, blank is a result of blank. Your grade, grade is a result of your attendance. Next, the amount of gas in an airplane is a function of the length of time it's been flying. Oh, wait, we got lots of phrases going on up here. Is a function of, remember that we can say is the same as depends on. So the amount of gas in the airplane, there's your dependent, depends on the length of time it's been flying. The independent is going to be the time. Now it says to label the X and the Y axis with the independent and dependent. Well, remember, independent is the X, dependent is the Y. So the independent is going to be the time, because that's the X axis. The dependent is going to be the amount of gas, because that's the end result, that's the Y. So to sketch it, at time 0 before you fly, you have a lot of gas in the plane. The longer you fly, the less gas is in the plane. This is going to be a decreasing line. It's going to be going down because the longer you fly, the less gas you have. Next one, you can pause that video and come back and see how you do. The Carefree Cab Company charges its customers a $30 service fee and 50 cents per every mile. The function C equals 50 cents M plus 30 represents, here's our information, total cost C and miles driving M. What is the thing that has to happen first? Well, first, right here, this is the same as saying Y equals 0.5x. First thing you have to do is drive the miles. This is the independent variable. Your dependent is the total cost. Remember that it says blank is a function of. Function of is the same as depends on. So the dependent depends on the independent. So the total cost is a function of the number of miles. Try the next one. Pause the video and come back and see how you do. The number of magazines sold determines the amount of profit made selling. Determines. Be careful with this one because remember you're going to have the independent determines the dependent. Well, that makes sense because the first thing you have to do, remember the independent is the first thing, you have to sell the magazines. The result, the second thing, is the profit. So the dependent is the profit. Remember we have X, then Y. X is the independent, Y is the dependent. So I've got number of magazines and then the dependent is the profit. If I wanted to sketch it, number of magazines, if I haven't sold any, I have no profit. The more magazines I sell, the more profit I have. So the line is increasing. It is going up. Next one, pause this video, see if you can figure out what the next figure number is, and come back and see how you do. Okay, so on this one, it says use the pattern to answer the following questions. Well, when I look at this, what I see is the first pattern has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, has 6 blocks. The second pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The third one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, has 14. So this is the pattern number, and this is the number of blocks. So as I go through here, it wants to know what is the for the fifth figure. Well, the pattern number figure, same thing. Fourth and fifth. Well, what are these increasing by? They're increasing by 4 each time. So that means this next one would be 18. Whoops, didn't want to write. And if I increase by 4 again, it's 22. So it would need 22 blocks. It says write an algebraic equation that represents this pattern. Well, it's increasing by 4 each time, right? So if I had this, let's see, the number of blocks would be, if I, what's staying the same? Maybe I should say it like that. What are the same things that are staying the same? Well, these two right here in the middle are staying the same. What's changing is that I'm adding 4 around the edge each time. So 4 times the pattern number, which would be x. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2, which are these 2 that stay the same. The constant is plus 2. To make it be an equation, I would add y equals. Write a sentence that describes the total number of blocks and the figure numbers. The number of blocks is 4 times, whoops, the pattern number, or the figure, I said it wants us to use figure number, times the figure number. Oh my, it doesn't want to write. Plus 2. Predict the number of blocks needed for the 12th figure. Now you could draw them all out, but I'm going to use like this right here to figure it out. So I'm going to take 4 times the 12th figure plus 2. 4 times 12, well, that's 48, plus 2. That would give me 50 blocks. Now it wants us to look and see which of the following was the dependent variable. Okay, the second result. Okay, well, we're taking 4 times the figure number, so x is the figure number, and y is the number of blocks. Whoops. So the dependent variable is the number of blocks. Next, identify each relation as a function or not a function. Remember, when something is a function, the x numbers cannot repeat. So in A, remember it goes x then y. I have 2, -2, and 3. Those numbers do not repeat. 2 and -2 are 2 separate ones. So this is a function. See, the y numbers don't matter. The y's are like your ex-boyfriend. They don't matter. Okay, just kidding. All right, now, next one here. This is a mapping. Remember, this is x, then this is y. I have 4 and negative 3, 3 and negative 5, 2 and negative 5, and 2 and negative 4. Oh my. Now look at all the x numbers, because the only thing that matters are these x numbers. Do any of these x numbers repeat? Yes, they do. The 2's do. So this is not a function. Another way to tell from a graph is called the vertical line test. Meaning if I draw a vertical line and it only touches through my graph once, then that means yes, this is a function. There will be more on this soon in the next coming days in our class, and they're also online. Next, they want us to solve these. So let's take a minute. If you're at home, pause the video and solve this equation. I'm going to draw my dotted line. I need to get the x by itself, so the first thing I'm going to do is addition and subtraction if it's there. This says minus 15, so I will add 15 to each side. These cancel, and I get 5x equals 35. You can divide by 5. X equals 7. Next one. Pause the video and come back and see how you do. I'm sorry, I guess I should have put up here the second step is multiply or divide. Okay, so right here, drawing my dotted line. I'm going to subtract 3 from each side because you have to do addition and subtraction first. Whoop, let's see here. X divided by 4 equals, because these cancel, negative 1 and negative 3 is negative 4. Now it says x divided by 4. The opposite of divide is to multiply each side by 4. These will cancel out. X equals negative 16. Next one. Again, pause that video, come back and see how you do. Dotted line right here. We're going to do hippity-hoppity distributive property. 3 times x, negative 3 times 2. So I get negative 3 times x, negative 3x, negative 3 times 2, negative 6 equals 0. We're going to add 6 to each side. Negative 3x equals 6. Divide by negative 3. You would have gotten x equals negative 2. For more on those equations, you can go to Solving Multi-Step Equations on YouTube. Whoops. Under Craw Mama 1, and this thing doesn't want to write. Okay.